Hi, welcome back to Blanchy Talks Watches. For review today, we have a vintage Sekonda. This is from either the 1970s or the 1980s, and it was kindly sent to me for review by a forum regular, Ismai, on the International Watch League. So, as I said, this is from the 70s to 80s, and it's a pretty typical design for a 70s watch. It's a two-tone watch with gold-coloured elements. The centre of the polished bracelet and bezel here and the indices as well are also gold. The dial, it's quite hard to pick up on camera here, but it is textured. You can see it there. And let's see, can I get it? Yeah, that's a better angle there. There's squares and it's an almost iridescent effect. In person, the colour is a kind of a coffee colour. But it doesn't change quite a lot. You can see there much darker and much lighter squares appearing as the light catches it. So this would be a fairly standard dress style watch for the period. This is in quite good condition for the age. There is age related scuffs and discoloration on the gold, but it is all original, which is nice. So the bracelet is original, and for a lot of bracelets of the period, you can see they've got the folded links, which are quite cheap, and I tend to stay away from folded link bracelets except on vintage pieces like this. It's not the best bracelet, there is a lot of play in it, but for something that's potentially from the 70s, it's held up very well. For the size, it'd be considered small by today's standards, being, let me see here now, it is 34 millimeters, excluding the crown, with a lug length of 38.5. So quite small by today's standards, but for the time period it was kind of the usual. You'd see an awful lot of 34, 35, 36 millimeter watches. Now, while it is quite small for today's standards, smaller watches are creeping back in and becoming more and more popular. Over the past number of years, the popularity of large watches has been growing and growing to the point that there were some colossal pieces being produced, 50 plus millimeters. But I've noticed now a trend more towards the smaller size. You really see with the new release from Rolex, the 36 millimeter was very popular. So I think we're going to be seeing more small watches being worn, which really opens the door to getting in on some vintage pieces like this. So this particular model is the Sekonda Polaris Quartz with 3 atom, which is 30 meters water resistance. Really, you treat this as splash proof more so than a swimming watch. The buckle, while original, is unsigned. There is case back engraving of just some of the specs. Stainless steel case, water resistance. It has the day date option. It's very hard to capture on film, but the dial on this is very nice. It's quite unusual. You don't see many watches with the segmented effect on them, but also the texturing in the dial almost looks like brush strokes, but it is original. It's quite unusual, but it is very nice. You can see the direction of the brushes changes between the squares to give them a more pronounced effect, which is very nice. So I'll try this on, and this is much smaller than I'm used to wearing, but you know, I think I do make an exception for vintage pieces. I have a few quite small vintage watches that I would wear. For reference, my wrist is 7¼ inches. So there we go. It's a good bit smaller than you'll see me wear in other review videos, but it is quite nice as well. It's not too small. I think it doesn't look like a child's watch. 7¼ inches, my wrist is fairly standard. I think if you had a much bigger wrist, you're probably not going to get away with wearing something as small as this. I like the way the case flows straight into the bracelet, so it does help with the appearance of being larger. You can see this section here, the way it kind of sits up on top of my wrist rather than having the lugs protruding out and then just the strap very clearly hanging off it. It fills my wrist quite nicely. One thing to note on this watch, see where the bracelet joins, it's not your standard lugs, so that does raise the issue of if you were to replace the strap, you would have quite a lot of difficulty. You can't just pick up any strap to fit this. You'd need to find one that's specifically made for this watch, or a watch with similar lugs to this. I was very lucky with this one that it was actually sized to my wrist size. You can see there it's slightly loose, but it does have micro adjustments and plenty of them on the clasp, so there's room to tighten it in. But I don't mind too much with smaller watches like this. I don't mind having a little bit of play in them. On the bigger watches, as I said before, I wear them quite tight. On smaller watches like this, I leave them a little bit loose, just lets them slide around the wrist a bit and doesn't bother you too much. Watches like this are a great way to get into vintage watch collecting. This particular watch had been up for sale, and it actually didn't sell on eBay. I think the initial bid was something like £10 or £15, and it didn't actually sell, surprisingly, because it is in quite nice shape. The Sekonda name, obviously not as well known as Seiko or Citizen or the likes. That may have prevented it selling or just popping up in as many searches, but it brings me back to when I started collecting watches. I really got hooked on vintage watches on eBay, and you can really get some steals. Like, you could have had this for £10, and you know, it's nice getting vintage watches that you're not going to see every day on the street. And honestly, while I was trying to research this, I struggled to find any information on it, more so than the listing that had been up on eBay. So it's nice having a quirky little piece. The case is nice and different as well. It's slab-sided with quite an angular appearance. I love the way this watch catches the light. Obviously the ring light puts a lot more reflection than you'd normally get, but the different angles on the case and dial really play when you're out in the sunlight, and it is quite nice. So yes, anyone considering getting into watch collecting, I definitely recommend you just go onto eBay, go into the wristwatches category, used, and then set a low price and see what little hidden gems you can find. Watch like this for £10, quartz, set and forget. I think it's just a great option. I mean, what else can you buy for £10? Maybe a cheap Casio or something off AliExpress. Whereas this is a brand with a bit of heritage, and a watch like this has some history. Personally, I always think that's worth a bit. The history of a watch and what it may have seen in its lifetime is worth paying for, and I am a big fan of vintage watches. I have a few more vintage watches in my own collection that I will review in the near future, and I'm hoping to pick up a few more as well. Okay, I'll leave it there. Just a quick little review for today. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you troll through eBay looking for vintage watches yourself, or are you trying to start out collecting watches and don't know where to start? Yeah, so if you like the video, drop a like below and subscribe to see more content. Any engagement really helps, so I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video.